So what I'm going to do just at the beginning is give you a little introduction to the project itself. Those people who are here who are on the committee of the project, they know more about it. But for everybody else, you basically just had the little paragraph that I gave you over email to say, what we want to do. So I'm going to talk to you about that first, give you a little bit of an introduction to the workshop and what we want to do today, hopefully, in this one, and how it's going to build into the second and the third workshops that we're going to have later next year. So the overall aims of the project is to create a new research network that will look at the cultural and social and political implications of the Norman conquest by focusing on archaeology and material culture. And I've called it archaeology, but really I've invited people, lots of people who are interested in material culture, even if they're not archaeologists. So historians who are interested in material culture, art historians, architectural historians, people like that. And one of the main things that we want to do is create a research framework for the 11th and 12th centuries that we can communicate to other archaeologists and tell them why it's important to study this period, but also that we can take out to interdisciplinary audiences. So those of you who are here who come from different disciplines, your input is extremely valuable for telling us how we can best communicate and make ourselves heard by all the people who are having debates about the Norman conquest without us. The other main aim of the project is to bring together all these different arms of archaeology, which are not very good all the time at communicating with each other or actively collaborating with each other. So we've got within archaeology the kind of different methods that we use. So the people doing scientific archaeology and the people doing the sort of more humanities side of archaeology. In the prehistoric period, they have been better at combining those two things than we have been previously in the medieval period. And while we're getting better at it, it's still something that I think we could do more of. Also bringing together the academic and the professional, the sort of a commercial side of archaeology, as well as the public engagement through museums, organizations like the Council for British Archaeology, PAS, things like that, to focus on the Norman conquest. Because a lot of times, unlike historians, not very many archaeologists consider themselves sort of Normanists or specialists of this period. We have, I'm a church archaeologist, somebody else is an osteologist, and we do our things sometimes side by side without actually asking each other what it is that we're interested in about the Norman conquest or about this period. So overall, the plan is to get our act together, as Naomi so presciently said, to get our act together so we can actually go out and talk to other people usefully about what we can offer to discussions on the 11th and 12th century. So, go on. So the committee is there. So it's me and Naomi as co-investigators. Tim Pastel from Norwich Castle Museum is our external partner, and he's been really good and really supportive, and hopefully we're going to feed into stuff that's going on at Norwich Castle Museum, which I'll tell you a bit about later. Ben Jervis from Cardiff, Lizzie Craig Atkins from Sheffield, Robin Fleming very kindly Skypes into our meetings for the most part, but also shows up to things as a good historical voice. And then Caroline from Boydell and Brewer is also going to tell us how we can communicate, because Boydell is one of the best publishers of Norman period stuff. So how to tell us to best publish and communicate what we're doing. And it's started in June of 2017, and it's going to run through next December. So the main activities that we're going to do, we've got the 3 workshops today. The next one is going to be February 12th. Is that right? I think. Yeah. Yeah, February 12th in Exeter. We're just about to send out invites to talks and for people to show up to that one. And that's going to focus on archaeological methods and really thinking about new applications of methods that are maybe being used in other periods or things that we're already doing, how we might specifically focus them on questions about the Norman conquest. And then the last one, Tim will host in Norwich at the Capsule Museum on the impact of Norman conquest archaeology on heritage and the public. What can we do to make our stories from the material side of things, more resonant to the public and what they understand about the Norman Conquest. We'll do some. We're signed up to present at Leeds next summer and at Battle in 2018, and hopefully the Haskins Conference in 2018 as well, to target interdisciplinary and international audiences and tell them what's going on with this project. We'll have an academic article on the research agendas, and then hopefully also a popular article to publicize what we're doing. We're planning on collaborating with other relevant ongoing research projects. So Sarah Rees-Jones and I have been running a speaker series here called Normans in the North. And Sarah has ideas about Norman cities. And then also Matthew Collins has been working on 11th and 12th century manuscripts, doing zooms, doing zooarchaeological testing on the vellum. Ben and Lizzie Craig-Atkins have a project on Normans and diet, and obviously anything else that you participants are involved in that could be relevant for us. What we want to do is help feed into, your projects can feed into what we're doing, and hopefully we can feed back again. And then the other thing is to plan and write a grant to fund a larger collaborative project, which will focus on new research that we can actually, get some money to do rather than to just talk about. But this should hopefully provide the seeds for those ideas. The drivers that are behind it is right now, archaeology and material culture doesn't play a significant role, or not as significant as it should, I think, in scholarly debates on the Norman Conquest. There's lots of debates that have been happening for a long time amongst historians that haven't really included us or our evidence. Some of this is, well, most of it is our fault as archaeologists, I think. The Norman Conquest, especially in England, is the divider between early medieval and late medieval. And people consider themselves most of the time early medievalists or late medievalists. And the Norman Conquest kind of falls in between, and nobody really, it doesn't belong to anyone. And I found this out when I asked the curators from the British Museum whether they wanted to participate. And so I emailed, and there was an early medieval and a late medieval curator, and I said, I don't really know which one of you focuses on the Norman Conquest. Would you both be interested? And both of them said, that's not really my thing. So that's, it was very it proved the point, I think. Like I said before, very few archaeologists consider themselves Normanists, unlike documentary scholars. And the various branches and subdisciplines of archaeology that could contribute to the questions that we might ask don't always effectively collaborate. The people who have a lot of the material and the data that we could be using, units that have massive archives, museums, are often disconnected from what we're talking about as academics. They don't know what we want, so that they can come to us and say, but I have all this interesting stuff you might look at. And vice versa, we don't necessarily know what they have that could help us with these ideas that we're putting out there. And then there's a lot of opportunities as well. It's an understudied period of archaeology compared to many others, so I think there's a lot that can be done that we're not doing. It's a period that's very popular in other cognate disciplines like history and art history, so it's an avenue into being interdisciplinary. And there's considerable material culture from excavations and museum collections that isn't being fully exploited. I think particularly from art museums that have enormous collections of Romanesque material culture that we're not really engaging with properly as archaeologists. Also, we're good at the kind of process of things and thinking over the long period rather than identifying an individual event. So if we think about a long Norman conquest, the process, not just the battle at Hastings, but what happens after it, we're good at that, and we can advance different conceptions of how somebody thinks about the conquest by thinking about it over that longer term. Hopefully we can increase the awareness of the role that scientific archaeology can play in medieval research, and also we are at an advantage in that the Norman conquest in this period already has very good name recognition in the public consciousness. So we have the potential for impact in education and media. People don't need to be told what the Norman conquest is, like they might do for something in the Mesolithic or other parts of the Middle Ages. So we have a jump start in that regard. So right now, the public perceptions of the Norman conquest are primarily focused on war, battles. If you Google Norman conquest, this is the kind of stuff that comes up. It's very focused on Hastings and knights and war, and the harrying of the North and sort of dramatic events like that are documented in the historical records. And when we get to what the perception of archaeology offers to this period, it's big buildings, which are great. I like buildings. I do buildings myself. I do churches, but it's not all that there is. So if you go to the BBC page on Normans, this is the only bit that covers material culture, and it's buildings, churches of Britain, cathedrals of Britain, British architecture, ivory carvings randomly. There's one thing, but that's also art, it's by an art historian. And that's it, basically. And the I Spy guide is Norman churches and castles. There's nothing about landscape. There's nothing about environment. There's nothing about people, bones, that sort of thing. There's all sorts of things. There's, apart from the ivory, there's nothing on the everyday life of material culture that survives from this period. So the things that we're going to do, apart from the scholarly discussions that we have in these workshops, is hopefully feed into Norwich Castle Museum's HLF grant and refurbishment. And Tim isn't here today, unfortunately, because he's at a big HLF meeting. So it was important for him to be there. But they have basically been granted stage 1 HLF funding to scope what would be required to refurbish and redesign the interior of the Norman castle to display it as the 12th century palace, as opposed to the Victorian interior that they have right now. And going along with that will be a whole new redisplay of their medieval collections, loans of the BM collections. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to discuss the kinds of stories that of the Norman conquest and archaeology that might feed into the exhibits and the reconstruction they're doing at the Castle Museum. The other thing that I'm going to ask you to do is to provide some information for this phone app called Field Trip. And so basically, if you have a phone and you have Field Trip on your phone and you're in a town, you can say, show me these things in York. So history, cool things, architecture, food, arts and museums. So what we can do is they will provide us with the forms to fill out. And basically, it's a little bit of text and a picture. And what we want to do is populate some of these things like history and architecture and art museums and so on with stuff with Norman conquest archaeology, so that when people are in York or in Norwich or in Lincoln or wherever, they can see some of the stuff that's going on. And one of the great advantages of this as an impact activity is that it's free. So we did not have to fund it in any way because finances are tight on a network grant. So the app is free to download. Our information, we will supply the information, send it back to them, and they will upload it to the app. So so hopefully everybody who participates in the network, if you have something relevant to put in for either the city where you live or the places that you've worked, the places where you've done your research, we can add them to it and help populate and make the Norman conquest archaeology a little bit more visible to the public. We've got web and social media, so if you're on these things, please do follow us and promote us. So on Twitter and Facebook, we're at ArchyNC. On YouTube, hopefully this sort of thing will be streaming. And then we've got a website. I know some of you, thank you very much, you've uploaded your research profiles to the Google folder that I did, but if you haven't done that yet, that's fine. Just please do that, and as I get them, I will add them to the website. So this is not going to let me on at the moment, but I'll go and hopefully I'll show you the website later. I'll put it up over lunch or something. So the goals for today: discuss new ways of thinking about the 11th and 12th centuries and the Norman conquest, identify the key questions and narratives and kinds of evidence that we haven't yet addressed sufficiently, identify what areas we might most usefully intersect with other disciplines, and identify the challenges and opportunities in communicating archaeological agendas for the Norman conquest and these material dimensions. And some themes that we might kind of go in thinking about, and I stress these are just the things that I think that are important, and I hope you guys have other themes that you want to emphasize as well. But for me, I want to try to move beyond the kind of standard thing that we do when we have a big event is to identify what changed and what stayed the same, and we can do that. But I want to ask, why do some things change, and why do others stay the same, and why those particular things, and who does that change or continuity benefit? Who's making that happen? Why are people choosing to keep some things the same and change some things? Hopefully a more complicated sense of ethnicity and identity. Normans and natives are obviously not only defined by their ethnicity. We sometimes talk about, the Normans doing this and the Saxons doing this, assuming that they are doing that because they're Norman or Saxon. But actually, hopefully we can all see that it's a lot more complicated than that. They're driven by a wide range of other social roles, and you may make decisions as an Anglo-Saxon to participate in various Norman things in order to kind of secure your place in the world. So to hopefully think about how we can make that more nuanced. So people and things, who are the creators and users of things, and who are their audiences? Process and scale. So like I was talking about before, a process rather than an event. Are there many Norman conquests rather than a Norman conquest, a kind of monolithic event that might happen in different ways in different places because of things that are already there, kind of installed on the ground, or particular contingencies? And then hopefully moving beyond England-centric questions, which some of the presentations today by Martin and Teig will hopefully help us do.